Thank you, Van. Good morning, everyone. It's, as always, as every week, it's a pleasure to be here and to discuss some of the issues you are studying, reading about in the lectures, in the readings we've provided previously. Okay. Now, this is Unit 5, in which we will be explaining some of the main components of this piece of the puzzle, which are taxes. The next week we will discuss the main components of the other piece of the puzzle, which is redistribution and social spending. These are the two main branches of the fiscal system, which on which we can simulate reforms or changes or the introduction of new elements. Right? It's on one hand changes in taxes, either to personal income tax or consumption, or taxes on consumption, on household consumption. And on the other hand, we have the redistribution of these taxes through, for instance, non-contributory pensions, through conditional cash transfers, etc., etc. So any change that the government it's interested it's interested in introducing any change into taxes and social expenditure. It's necessarily be conducted on either of both sides, right? So, for instance, in Mexico, the latest fiscal reform was intended to increase mainly consumption taxes, or changes in the VAT rates. So mainly the effects that we will be microsimulating or measuring are due to the influence of the changes in the VAT, right? If, for instance, in Peru, the government was an interesting exercise on the social expenditure side. They were interested in modeling and simulating the effects of poverty and inequality of changing the amount and the coverage of social expenditure via conditional cash transfer. So in that case, the fiscal reform was mainly focused on the redistribution side without affecting the taxation. So, as for today, we will be discussing the main elements, which are of the first side of the first piece of the puzzle, which is taxation. So mainly we have direct and indirect taxes. Okay, the objective I already described. Describe the objective, which is to inform you about the main elements. Okay, we have this tree, if I can call it like that. As you remember, in the main document of the second unit, you had this scheme with describing each of the income concepts you need to construct in order to simulate the different interventions that affect each component of income. As you might recall, we start from the market income, which is equivalent to the income that individuals and households perceive, for instance, from from the labor market, right? From private transfers like remittances, etc. So that is the main or the starting point of the analysis. That is the market income concept, to which or from which we will be deducting or adding several components. For instance, as you remember in that unit, if you deduct the taxes you paid for the income you receive, which are the income taxes, then you will have a concept called usually net market income, right? Then, okay, so you have a second income concept. So, of course, the market income and the net market income differ between them in the sense that you have deducted a small amount or a large amount. It depends on the income amount and the income tax rate. But you will have a delta, a difference between both concepts. That difference is you can think about that difference as the effect that direct taxes can have on several social indicators. For instance, let me put it in the simplest way, which is sometimes these exercises are very complex. They involve, of course, a very detailed knowledge of the rules, the laws, the understanding of different mechanisms. Of course, it involves mathematics in terms of some equations and identities. But let me put it in the simplest way. So, if you measure poverty and inequality, for instance, the Gini coefficient, using the first income concept, market income, you can have that poverty rate, it's, I don't know, 20%, and inequality, it's, I don't know, 0.45. Then you deduct the direct income tax, right? And you obtain the second concept, which is net market income. Using that income concept, you can measure, again, poverty and inequality, and you will have that probably poverty now it's 21%, and that inequality it's, I don't know, 0.46. So the difference between the poverty rates and the inequalities between both income concepts, it's, you can think of it like the pure effect of the direct tax on income, on poverty and inequality, right? Okay, so now if you, to the net market income concept, you add, for instance, the public direct transfers from the government, you will have another income concept, which is in that scheme was called the disposable income, I think. Yes, the disposable income. So if you, again, you can measure poverty and inequality, and now you can have the combined effect of direct taxes plus public transfers on poverty and inequality. So the idea is to disentangle the main components, the main fiscal components that affect different constructions of income concepts. So we can isolate each tool, each fiscal intervention, so we can measure their effects on income, on poverty and inequality. Or if our interest is on the public finance in terms of increasing the amount of income from taxes from the perspective of government. Okay, we can evaluate that as well, right? So how much, in this case, as a government, how much could I receive for from increasing the rate of indirect taxes, for instance, on personal income. So, okay, so the microsimulation has, as Alberto, well, not Alberto, as I mentioned in our previous session, when we review these pieces of the puzzle, we have on one hand we have the household surveys and another set of required information. We have the tax components. We will see the next week. We have the social expenditure components, and we have the main goals, which are the effects on poverty and inequality, which we can call them the social effects, or we can have the public finance effects, right? So across countries, in our experience, the main goal of several governments is to increase the income from taxes, right? Because they have to achieve, they have to spend more. There are needs, there are necessities in investing more in public infrastructure, in more social spending, etc., and they require money, right? They require income. So the main tools to gaining more income, it's through taxes mainly. So, but another bunch of governments are interested in the social impact, right? The social cost that implied by accomplishing the first goal. So we are in these exercises. The idea is to be able to cover both sides, the costs, the benefits, who bears the burden, who receives the benefits, etc., from both the perspective of households and the perspective of the government. So the idea with these exercises in evaluating any reform, any changes previously to that changes to occur, is to maximize the benefits for the government while minimizing the social costs, right? Okay, so now we are back on the presentation. This is a simplification of that first scheme, of that first three to describe which are the type of taxes. So on one hand, you have the direct taxes, which are levied on the income as you an individual earn, the taxes you paid for the ownership of your house, for instance. In some countries, that is a tax. The ownership of vehicles as well. In some part of the literature, I think that wrongly they argue that the expenditure on buying a car and the taxes involved are part of the indirect tax system. We argue that no, here in this scheme developed by Alberto Castañón, who I think it's here correctly, and I agree with this. The sale of the buying a car, it's part, and owning a car, it's part of the direct tax system. So in several countries, for instance, in Mexico, some time ago, if you owned the car, you had to pay a fixed tax depending on the model and the value of the vehicle. You had to pay a tax every year, right? It's not a fixed tax. It's a tax that depends on the model and the cost of the vehicle. So the amount is changing every year, etc., etc. There are another type of direct taxes which are levied on the successions, the inheritances, of course, the financial gains, the income from capital. But just here, it's important to recall that in many of these exercises, given that we are working with household surveys, which are a representative sample of the population, this is important, the word sample, because of being a sample means that even though it is representative of the whole population of the country, by being a sample, it means a restricted sample. It means that some individuals, especially those located at the top of the income distribution, are not correctly captured in the records, right? So we don't know what is the amount of financial gains, for instance, or corporate gains owned by these rich families located, as I said, at the top, the 1% or the 0.1%. So we cannot do that. Of course, we don't know as well by using the household survey. We don't know what are the taxes paid or the incomes earned by the enterprises, right? So we have to bear in mind that the micro simulations we are discussing are focused on individuals and households, right? And in that regard, we try to simulate the effect of direct taxes on personal income, the indirect taxes on household consumption, and other instruments with the super rich families which are not captured in the survey, and what happened especially with the corporations and private enterprises, etc., etc. Of course, there are different tools with which we can have access to the fiscal records from the tax authority, which are very confidential. But if you achieve to have access to those documents, to those data sets, there are methods to impute or to link those records with the household survey, and then you can have an adjusted new distribution of income, so you can have a picture, a more comprehensive picture of the inequality dynamics and the incidence of how those taxes affects the income distribution, etc., etc. Okay, but that is a different story, very interesting story. But we are not concerned, at least now, at least in this module, we are not concerned on what happened to financial gains and corporate incomes. Okay, so income taxes, we can model income taxes in the survey because we can have access to the information. I mean, we know what are the brackets, what are the rates that are levied on individuals, and of course, in the household survey, we know how much individuals earn from labor or from the ownership of some businesses, etc., etc. Okay, so we can model that. If we have consumption, we can model how much they pay for the services and goods they consume. For instance, we can model the added value, which is part of the indirect tax system. We can model the rates of how much they pay for the consumption of special goods such as alcohol, some non-alcoholic beverages, but with a high caloric content, which are usually taxed with a different, with a higher tax in order to disincentivize the consumption, which for several reasons, mainly because it affects individuals' health, and the provision of health, it's more expensive, so it is better to disincentivize the consumption, etc., etc. So we can model that. We can model the taxes that are charged on the amount consumed, on the sales, etc., etc. So just a portion of the first three that you reviewed in the second document about the several income concepts and their components, it's here. What are the main taxes? How they are categorized? So direct, indirects. So this is a simple scheme that we are usually able to model in the household survey. Okay. Here in this explanation, I will borrow the examples that Alberto used in the previous session. You can think about the system in this way. There are companies in a country. There are companies which produce goods and services and sell such goods, and there are, of course, households and their individuals who purchase those goods, right? Let's think about food. Some companies produce a liter of milk, for instance, and individuals, of course, in order to have some healthy breakfast composed by cereal, they require milk, for instance. So they have to buy milk, and that product can be taxed by some specific rate for value-added tax or for sales, etc., etc. Okay, so if you look at the top relationship, it's just the relationship. If you look at the arrows in the top of this scheme, it's just the relationship I just described. Household acquire some goods and services which are produced by companies. But if you look at the arrows, the relationship in the bottom, it implies the reverse relationship, right? Where households, they sell their services to companies which are mainly labor, for instance. Let's think about, let's make it simple. Households sell labor to companies to produce the income. So by selling labor, households receive an income, which is an income for which they have to pay taxes because they are exploiting that stock of human capital through the labor market, right? And in order to keep that individual who is employed to be healthy and nourished, they have to buy some food, which is produced by companies, and in buying that product, they as well have to pay some taxes, both the households and the companies, for producing it, for selling it, and the household for buying it. So if you look at those relationship, it depends on the it depends on the type of tax. But if you look at that relationship, on the top of the figure, the P times X, it's basically price per quantity, right? So there are some taxes that are levied on quantities, as we just mentioned in the previous slide. There are some taxes that are levied on quantities, and there are some taxes that are levied on the combination of price and quantities, right? And the same applies at the bottom. So this is the basic relationship to understand how both direct and indirect taxes works. At the top of the relationship, it's mainly indirect taxes. At the bottom is direct taxes, because direct taxes are paid directly by the income individuals earn, by the income that companies earn, which we say we are not dealing with here. Here we are just focusing on the dynamics at the household and individual levels, right? So it is direct taxes are taxes paid by income individuals receive, and indirect taxes are taxes paid by individuals in terms of the quantity and the amounts of the goods they consume, and in terms of the amounts and the quantities companies sell these products, right? So this is the basic relationship, and we are not dealing yet with the role of government. Now in this slide, we have the role of government. So immediately the slide became, at least visually, more complex. It is more complex because the government, it's the agent who regulates those relationships, right? It's the agent who is in charge of administering and charging those taxes in the two relationships, the top at the bottom of the scheme, and also is the government who is in charge of administering those taxes and then returning those taxes in the form of public services, in the form of transfers, in the form of infrastructure, transportation, etc., right? So now you can see by changing the slides, the identities also changed. So from the previous, let me do a parenthesis here. From the previous session we had just 1 hour ago, we faced several issues with mathematical identities, which are, I know, this is an online course designed for you who come from different backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, not necessarily are specialized in economic or mathematical equations, and these topics sometimes could be quite complex to follow. We wanted just to express the main identities here. So for you, with more time, you can analyze those identities. You can see that they are not that complex. They are basic basic identities. But my goal here. So what I want to let you know is that please don't get scared about these equations. They are important in the sense that we have to deal with those identities when we are modeling this, so we have to substitute concepts on numbers, etc., etc. But for the purpose of this explanation, please, which is important to know, it's the main, it's the rational, how the system works, and not that much the focus on what means the P plus the T times 6. That is simply a notation. As you can see here, for instance, at the top again, a tax to the quantity, an indirect tax which is charged to the quantity. So for instance, you can, the identity, what it's telling you is that, okay, as a government, I will tax this relationship, so I will tax the quantity consumed by households, for instance. Just let me put it in the simplest way. So a tax on quantity, it's just simply the price plus the tax times the quantity of the goods purchased, right? Let's say that 1 liter of milk, the price is, I don't know, £1. The tax is 10%, and the quantity you buy of milk is 3 liters per month or per week. So the calculation of that identity is not that complex, right? So it's £1 plus the tax times the quantity, right? So that in that way you are including, you are dealing with the tax in these first stages of the microsimulation exercise. So let's imagine that you are you are working with your household survey. You know how much the household consume on milk, right? So the household is reporting that they bought 3 liters of milk the last month, and you know, because you have access to public information about the prices of the milk, and you also have access to the rates of tax on milk. So you solve the identity, and you can immediately know how much of taxes are paying these households in terms for the milk they are consuming, right? So don't worry about the equations. You can study them later with more time. We can actually one of the suggestions from the previous session was probably to devote one additional special session in this course to discuss some technicalities like these equations, like how they work, by not by just like this now, like just reviewing the identity. So what is P, what is T, what is X? No, but to implementing a specific exercise using Excel, and then step by step describing how these identities are working. So I think I am assuming, probably not. Probably you prefer just to stay like that because my explanation was super clear and you have everything super clear, you understand everything, so probably you don't require that exercise. But if you do, I think that it will be a great exercise, so you can have a full understanding on how these identities, how the subtraction and the addition of the different taxes works on a real household survey, or a restricted sample, because dealing with the whole survey will be quite complicated. But I don't know, 1,000 households, 100 households. We can design. Actually, we are designing an exercise, a very intuitive exercise to review all the concepts and now these identities we are studying here. So you can, at the end of the course, you can have a clear understanding of the main rationale in terms of, in technical terms. But as for today, as for now, the idea is for you just simply to understand the rationale, right? So these identities are just here to express the different types of taxes, both direct and indirect, and what is the role, what are the relationships between companies and households, and who is in charge of administering those taxes, and how the tax burden work, if you want to say like that. Let me move into this formalization of each of the taxes. For instance, in the case of the value-added tax, what is the tax? You know, what is the VAT tax? Of course, probably, surely, previously to this course, you are familiar with what a VAT is. So in most countries, it's the same. When you acquire a specific good, with like an apple or like a TV or a liter of milk, probably you are paying some taxes, which is the value-added tax. So this tax corresponds to the expenditure made by households. And in terms of the microsimulation, you can isolate the amount of taxes from the amount of money that the household reported in the form of an expenditure. So, for instance, if you can see the first equation, it's about that the expenditure that each household in the survey reported, what they consume. For instance, yeah, it is the same example I mentioned before. It's what is the price of one good? 1 pound, for instance, the liter of milk. What is the tax? It's 10%. So the first identity in black characters, which is 1 plus the tax, is 1 plus 0.1, that is 10% of the tax. So it is 1.1 plus the market price of the milk. And Q is the quantity. So this household, in this example, in the foregoing example, it's 3 liters per month or per week that this household consumes. So mathematically, the expenditure can be expressed like 1.1, which is the increase of the tax, times the market price without the tax, the market price of the good without the tax, times the quantity of the goods consumed. So this is the way you can understand, or you will find the amount of expenditure in a household survey. So if you open the household survey, the household consumption survey of your respective country, and you look at the columns of the expenditures of the total expenditures on, I don't know, on food, you can see that, oh, this household consumed 20 pounds on milk last month. So by understanding how that 20 pounds is composed with the access to, as I said, with the previous knowledge of what the tax rate is and what is the price of the goods in the market, so you can construct the first equation, right? So that is equivalent, for instance, to the amount reported in the survey. If you are interested in isolating, okay, Ana Sofia, I got lost. You were explaining the first equation. Oh, I mean, I got what you say, but do not match with what I see on the slide. Okay, let me go back on track. I'll start again. The formalization of the model. Let me put it in the simplest way. You open your household survey. I don't know where you're from, Ana Sofia, but I don't know. The Mexican case, the household survey in Mexico. You look at the column of the of expenditures on food, for instance. So you can see that the first record, the first household, consumed 20 pounds, or I don't know, 200 pesos. Let me talk about pounds. 20 pounds of milk during the previous month, right? That 20 pounds, it's basically the first equation, right? Why? Why is that? Because in the household service, households report how much they consume in a specific good, right? And it is our role to disentangle the price and the quantities and the tax involved in order to simulate the effect of the tax. So, for instance, those 20 pounds could be the result of having consumed 3 liters of milk, right? So, if you notice, we are just scattering the elements. Think of it like decomposing the elements that yield the 20 pounds, right? So those 20 pounds are the result of having consumed 3 liters of milk. So each liter price, the price of each liter is, I don't know, 5 pounds. So 5 pounds times 3 liters consumed is 15. So that is different from 20. Okay, so the difference could be due to the tax paid, right? For the consumption of the milk. So think of those 20 pounds as the first equation, which is the result of the quantity, the Q, times the price of the good, which includes the tax. The tax is, for instance, I don't know. Yeah, the previous example. The price it's let me use numbers that are super easy. The tax is 10%. How do you express a 10% tax? It's using decimals, right? If you want to increase some value by a certain rate, you use the 1 point something, right? If it is 10%, so and you want to increase 10% some specific value, then you use 1 plus 0.1, which is the 10% in proportion. So 1.1 multiplied by the price of this good. So if the price was £5 and you add 10%, so £5 times 1.1, how much is it's 5.5, right? Are you following me? If please reply in the chat if you are following me. Okay, and how about the rest? Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, so this household consume 3 liters of milk. So 5.5 times 3, it's 5.5 times 3, it's 16.5. So let's forget about the 20 pounds of in your household survey. Let's keep it with this result. So 16.5 pounds, it's what you can is what you see in your household survey as it is, right? So you go to the National Institute of Statistics, you download your data set, you open your data set and look for the household consumption column on food, for instance, and then on milk, and you can see that this first household is consumed an amount of 16.5 pounds last month. That 16.5 pounds can be decomposed in this first equation. It's the result of the price per unit, the quantities consumed of that unit, and the price, of course, multiplied by the tax, by the current tax. So you need to know, because that information is not in the household survey, you need to know what are the taxes, the tax rates for each specific good, and what is the price. And for that, if you think of yourselves as the consultant traveling to a country and to implement this microsimulation exercise, that is the importance of being supported by a local team who knows what are the rates, who knows how these rates work, what are the rules, what are the legal criteria to charge these rates, who pays, who doesn't pay, etc., etc. That's the importance. So this is the starting point. This is the basic identity, right? So you know now in this slide you know that identity. If you look at your data set, you only will see the 16.5 pounds. If you want to know what is the amount of taxes, you can use the second identity, which is just a simple mathematical trick, right? This is about isolate the amount of the tax by you look. You have the first identity, which is it's a multiplication. Given that it is multiplying, you can move it to the other side by dividing, right? So price per quantity will be equal to the amount paid divided by the tax. So these are simple identities just to isolate the amount of tax. So if you know if the accountant in the country you are working with this model, he or she tells you that, oh look, the the tax rate for the consumption of milk is 10%. Oh, okay, so you can easily discount that amount of taxes from to the amount of money to the amount of expenditure reported in the survey, right? And that small amount or big or large amount of taxes that you will be isolating and putting in a different column of indirect taxes on food, that is the column you will be moving, you will be changing to simulate a specific reform, right? So again, this can be microsimulations exercises can be quite complex, but if you put it in this simple way, they are very, very simple to understand, right? So please don't worry about the equations you will see. You can have later sit comfortably and analyze each equation. The important thing is to understand the rationale of what are you doing, on what the microsimulation consists of, right? So, you know the 16.5 pounds that the household spent last month on milk. Then you can create a second column which will be equal to the amount paid and the tax. Okay, no. By discounting the amount paid, by discounting the tax to the amount paid, from the amount paid, you will have the second column, which is the amount of money in pounds equivalent to the taxes paid by that household. So you can have a second column of values, right? That is the main element of the microsimulation of in just this first case, which is indirect tax on milk, on food, on milk, Please notice, you can have different taxes depending on the product. You can have different taxes depending not only on the price of the product, but also on the quantity. For instance, gasolines. Gasolines can be, in some countries, they have a tax on the price, and also they have a tax on the quantity consumed. So you have to be dealing with more elements in order to subtract or to isolate the amount of the tax paid by this household. Why I insist in isolating the amounts paid? Because those amounts are your tools to implement the microsimulation, right? So if, for instance, the government is interested in a fiscal reform aimed at increasing the tax on milk from 10% to 11%, then you first need to know how much household paid in taxes currently and how much they will be paying with an increase of 1 percentage point, right? So those changes are implemented in the isolated amount of taxes, right? This is the rationale. This is like think of it like a very schematic explanation of how a microsimulation works. So how it is composed, right? And it is the same logic with other taxes, right? For instance, let me move to the formalization of the income tax. Again, you can have this identity. So the income you earn for your work in the labor market, it's composed by your net salary, right? But you know that when you receive your salary, you probably receive an email or a printed copy of that payment. And in that payment, you will see that there is an item which is income tax retained. And you can see another concept which is Social Security paid this month, etc., etc. So the sum of your net income plus all the other concepts will give you an income, an imputable income, which is the Y imputable in that equation, which is basically the gross income, right? So that is your gross salary. And that gross salary, again, can be decomposed by your net and the other elements that are affecting the composition of your gross salary, which are the income tax, right? Which are the Social Security contributions, which are the health insurance, which are the monthly payment you do for, I don't know, a dwelling benefit, etc., etc., right? So it is, as you can see, it is exactly the same rationale. So if you look at the expenditures column, you will see an amount, and that amount is composed, in the case of consumption, by prices, by a rate of taxes, and quantities. And it is important to bear in mind that taxes, indirect taxes, can be different depending on the product, depending, for instance, in the case of Mexico, the tax rate, the VAT tax rate is different in the center of the country than in the border of the country, right? Because it could follow several explanations and several rationales, mainly to promote the consumption in the border of the country, etc., etc. So you can have several rates depending not only on the product but also on the quantity, the type of product. It is not the same a tax on beverages that a different tax on beverages that have a certain amount of alcohol or that have a certain amount of sugar. So in addition to the standard 15% rate of tax, for instance, you can be dealing with an additional amount because of the sugar and an additional amount because of the alcohol content, and you can have an additional amount because of the quantity consumed, right? Which is the case of gasoline. And now you can be dealing with different taxes depending on where in the country you live, right? So in that sense, the microsimulation, it's a process that is quite complex, and for that you have to be sure that you have access to all the required information in terms of how the system works, what are the specific rates, who pays, who is exempted, etc., etc., so you can model properly in your household survey the different amounts. And by model, I am referring to how you can isolate those I won't use the small or large. By model, I refer to the amounts that you will be isolating from the reported gross amounts, right? It is the same logic, the same rationale with the income tax. Probably in some countries, I don't remember Alberto, but I think that in Costa Rica, the people in the survey, in the column not of consumption, but in the column of incomes, they reported their gross salary, so they know they are aware of how much of income tax they are paying. So the survey in the code book tells you, okay, that variable corresponds to the income tax paid, and that second column corresponds to the net income, etc., etc. But in most of the countries, individuals report, okay, what is your income last month? What was your income last month? Okay, I earned £1,000 the last month, and that will be my case. For instance, I don't remember, I don't know how much I paid in insurance or in direct tax, etc. I don't know. So if someone asked me what was my salary, what was my income the previous month, so I will say that it was okay. It was £1,000. So the person or the consultant, or the expert that is implementing the microsimulation should be aware about what are the rate of tax that correspond to the bracket, to the income bracket, where my £1,000 lie. What are the fixed amount of tax, if there is some fixed amount to be paid depending on my income, and if in addition to that fixed amount of tax there is another different rate, etc., etc. So it's exactly the same logic. You have to disentangle the different elements that are affecting the amount you will find in your household survey. So if you recall that first scheme, different income concepts in the unit 2, or in this case, in this scheme, the idea is to isolate the monetary amounts of each of these items, so you can fully model, or you can fully translate, if I can use that word, translate the whole fiscal system into the survey, so you can model any specific changes to taxes, to rates, on quantities, on prices, etc., etc. And this is only for the taxation side. Next week we will be reviewing what happened with the other main component, which is the social expenditure, right? So who is benefited from social expenditure, both in terms of direct transfers and in terms of in-kind transfers, etc., etc. So the problem becomes more complex and more complex, because you will know, for instance, let me mention this. I will go in further detail next week, but let me introduce this now. Again, as in the taxation side, you can be supported by a local team who will tell you that, okay, this is a specific direct transfers. For instance, Juancito Pinto in Bolivia, right? This is the cash transfers, or Juntos in Peru. And these transfers is intended to be received by single moms living in the rural part of the south of the country, and they have to be under the extreme poverty line. They need to have an income that is lower than the extreme income poverty line. So, okay, you have that information, you know what are the rules, you know what is the amount of the transfer, at least in the paper, in the rules. So you go and you go to your survey, open the information. You can see that the survey is reporting as part of the income that some households receive transfers from Juancito Pinto or the Juntos Conditional Cash Transfers Program. So, okay, this is amazing, right? I have all the information here, so I don't need to decompose anything. But you can find, more often than not, you will find that a lot of people who are not single moms, who are not living in the rural part of the South, they are receiving that transfer. So that is signaling you a problem of targeting. And that is an additional element you might be dealing with, right? So you can inform the government, and the government will tell, oh my God, in addition to increasing or to changing taxes, and in addition to increasing the amounts or to expanding the coverage of these transfers, so probably I will need to implement some changes on the targeting mechanisms of this reform, right? Of these transfers. And you as a consultant, as an expert, you can say, you know what, but how about this? You are government, you are interested in increasing the tax, the rate of the VAT tax on apples and oranges, right? And that will have certainly, I ran this micro simulation, and now I am estimating that you will have to deal with an increase of 1 million people, with an increase in poverty of 1 million people. That is, I mean, you will achieve your goal of income from taxes for your public finances purposes, so you can have more income to invest in that specific project, but it comes with the cost of increasing poverty in 1 million. So how you can deal politically with that? No, okay, that will be an issue. Let's explore some additional alternatives so I can have some the collection of a decent or a good amount of resources, but please help me to simulate a different scenario where poverty is, the increase in poverty is minimized, let's say just 100,000 people. So for those new poor, I can implement a different transfer, so I can compensate that, help me to do that. And you can say, look, how about this? I detected that some people who are not poor, who are not who are not supposed to be beneficiaries of these transfers, and these transfers implies a huge amount of public resources. How about simulating? How about to just targeting correctly? So you simulate the targeting of that policy, and without changing the structure of taxes, that is working on the tax frontier that is currently working in the country, you just change how the targeting, you just change the targeting, and you allocate better. So you can tell the government, look, if you allocate better, you can have this savings, which is equivalent to the amount you required in the first place. So this parenthesis is just for you to tell you that the possibilities in a microsimulation exercise are huge, but at the same time are complex, because you have to deal not only with prices, with quantities, with different rates depending on the product, depending on the content of the product, depending on the quantity, depending on the location, and not only on the income received from labor. Also, it could be a direct tax paid on some remittances received, so that's a different component of the income and a different component of the direct taxation. With the dwelling you own, the vehicles you own, depend either if they are for just mobility purposes, which is a regular car, or if your vehicle is for transportation, for work, that could be either or exempted from paying taxes, or charged with a different tax. So this is a huge web of possibilities, right? And also you will be dealing with targeting purposes, and on the side of expenditure, with who receives the benefit, what are the characteristics of the recipients of the benefits, etc., etc. So we will go in further detail next week. Geraldine, I think I lost connections. I'm sorry. Yeah. I can go back. Where specifically? If you can write. I mean, this is my intention is not to go in further detail with these identities, with which brought a lot of issues in the previous session. So I want to avoid the mathematical discussion. I just prefer to explain what is the rationale and what the microsimulation implies. And what is the rationale on both sides of the microsimulation, the taxation and the social expenditure? And for the taxation, you have two components, direct and indirect taxes. For indirect taxes, you will have to isolate the tax paid both on prices of the goods and services and on quantities on the goods and services. And depending on the product, the tax rates can vary a lot, whether if they are food, if they are cigarettes, if they are alcohol, etc., etc., if they are energy-related products like gasoline, etc. All right? So the task there is to isolate how much the household paid in those taxes. And for that, these identities are useful, this and another. This is just for the VAT, right? Which is derived by using information on prices and quantities and the current tax and the current rate of the tax. So you can identify how much a household is paying. For direct taxes, it's exactly the same rationale. Probably, likely, in the household survey, individuals will report the gross amount of the income they earn the previous week or the previous month or the previous day before the interview. So you have to deal with that information to express it in a uniform basis, which can be monthly. So in In dealing with that, you can have the amount, you need to disentangle how much of direct taxes that individual paid for the income he or she received last month, how much he or she paid in social security contributions, etc., etc. This is about creating different columns of amounts which will correspond to the taxes they paid in consumption and for the income they earn. So, at the end, at least for the taxation side, you can simulate some specific changes the government is intended to do. So I would like to increase the tax on milk or on apples, for instance. Okay, so I have identified how much the household pay at the current rate. Based on that, now I can simulate how much they will pay by increasing the amount in 1 or 2 percentage points. And it is the same with the income tax. If the government aims at increasing the income tax rate by 5% for the individuals who earn between £1,000 and £2,000, then you can simulate that change because you already identified how much individuals earn, how much they pay in the current setting, in the status quo, and now that you isolated the amount they paid, you can simulate different changes. So the art of the microsimulation consists, a lot of it, in disentangling the different elements. So that is the importance of that initial scheme of income concepts, right? How you can move from one specific income concept, which is, for instance, the market income, which is the income you receive from the labor market, without any tax, without any benefit, just the pure net income you receive, right? And that is the household income, the initial. So now you add, you discount, for instance, the taxes you paid by the consumption of different goods or services. Now you will have a different income concept, and I return to my initial explanation. If you measure poverty with that new income, which includes the indirect taxes, you can have a different poverty rate. So you can argue that the effect of indirect taxes on poverty is the difference in the poverty rates between the first income concept and the new income concept that accounts for the tax, for the indirect tax, right? That is the rationale. That is why we have to disentangle, to isolate each fiscal component. And each fiscal component, it's a whole process in itself, for which, as I said, it could depend on quantities, on different prices, on contents of the products, on where do you live, and on how much do you earn. For instance, for the income tax, if you can look at this table, this is an actual example for Mexico. Let's say that you are in the second level of income, in the second row, which is the upper limit. It's about that is wrong. The lower limit, it's almost 6,000, and the upper limit, it's it's slightly above 50,000 Mexican pesos, right? So if you if you earn an income in that bracket, you have to pay a fixed amount of 114 pesos plus an income tax rate of 6.4%, right? So, look, and this is very similar in across countries. So, the income tax that is paid for the income individuals earn depends on how much individuals earn. What is the salary, the monthly or annual amount of salary? But look, this is exactly the same rationale as in the case of indirect taxes. How much you will pay for the consumption of a specific good or service, it will depend on how much of that good you consume and what are the characteristics of those goods, whether they have alcohol, whether they are gasolines, whether they are exempted, whether they are sold on the border of the country, etc., etc. It's exactly the same rationale. In the income tax or the direct tax branch of the tax system, it's exactly the same. It depends on how much do you earn, right? And if there is some specific fixed amount you have to pay, regardless of the income tax rate. For instance, for the level of income 8, that individual, which is a very rich individual, has to pay a fixed amount of almost 73,000 plus, and or the income tax rate, right? So these are examples that we included from some actual cases that we implemented in Mexico and in other countries. But this is just for you to get an idea of the complexity and the rationale of what a microsimulation exercise is, because so far you have been reading a lot of concepts, of descriptions and purposes of the microsimulation, but how to run a microsimulation without dealing with mathematics and econometrics and that stuff, just understanding the rationale. This is the rationale. You have to identify the amounts that people is paying for the goods they consume, for the income they earn, so you can have an amount to be changed, increased or reduced depending on the proposal of the fiscal reform. I said previously that there are two main branches, which is the taxation side and the social expenditure side. The social expenditure side we will review it the next week. But a different component. Okay, Ana Sofia, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. And as I said at the beginning of the session, we will be preparing a specific exercise in Excel, so you can have a thorough understanding of what we are reviewing now. Bye bye. Okay, so we have the taxation side, we have the social expenditure side that we will review the next week. But for the taxation side, and in the taxation side we have the direct and indirect and the indirect tax. For the income tax, the direct side, we have to deal with the gross income, with the net income, which will depend on the different taxes depending on how much individual earns. But as you can see in this first identity, the gross income is not only affected by the net income and the tax rate of that income, but also on the social security contributions. For instance, if you look at the equation 4, the last element of the equation, the SS, is the social security contributions. That is another important, very important part of the system we have to deal with. And this adds more complexity depending on the structure of the social security system in your countries. Again, this table is for Mexico. In Mexico, this is not quite complex system, but it's fairly complex. Brazil, it's a super complex system because in Brazil, the social security system involves the federal government plus the state government plus the municipal government at different rates, etc. So to model the Brazilian system is quite complex. But in Mexico, for instance, not only we have been dealing with quantities and prices and the different rates of tax depending on the goods, and not only on taxes on how much individuals earn for the income tax, but we have to deal with the last element of the equation, which is social security. How individuals contribute to the system. In Mexico, for instance, if they are employed, if they are salaried workers in the private market, they have to pay contribution to the IMSS, which is the Mexican Institute of Social Security. If they are salaried workers working as a public or in the public sector or as a government official, they have to contribute to the other system, the ISSSTE, which is the social security system for the public employees. And that is for the federal government. But there are also the systems that are only for the I don't know how to translate this, for the decentralized public agencies. There is the system for the public universities across the country. There are a specific system for each of the 32 states in Mexico. So, and within each system, there are different rates, different contributions, different amounts of contributions, again, depending on how much you earn. So, look, we started with downloading and opening our household data set, and by looking at the specific amount of money household consume on milk. So we have that amount, that 16.5 pounds amount, which is composed by a specific tax rate, a specific price, a specific quantity. Now we have to deal with a lot of products, a lot of goods, and then you have to deal with the income column, which is how much they earn per year or per month, what are the different rates depending on how much they earn. Now, the third column, it's the social security contributions. How much they pay depending on their work, where work, and how much they earn as well. And now, the next week, you have to deal with, okay, these are the amounts they pay. Now, how much they receive. And you have to deal with isolating the specific amount of transfers households and individuals receive as a benefit of a direct transfer as a benefit of a subsidy, direct and indirect subsidy. For instance, probably the cost of the subway travel is subsidized by 20% per trip. So that is an indirect subsidy. So you have to be well informed about the different taxes, about the different benefits, the rates, and how those rates and taxes work. What are the rules? What are the legal guidelines? Who are the beneficiaries? Who are supposed to be the beneficiaries? And who are supposed to be the people who have to pay for taxes and social security contributions? That means, with the support with the local team, that means that you, at the end, you are being able to translate the whole fiscal system, both taxation and social spending, into a data set, which is a traditional household survey collecting information of income and consumption. And that's it. If you achieve to isolate each component, then you can play with that. You can subtract amounts, you can add amounts, you can measure poverty and inequality for the different concepts of income that you already know, that you already review in the second unit, the market income, the net market income, the disposable income, the consumable income. Those are concepts that are composed by the different fiscal interventions that we are isolating, the different taxes, the different transfers, right? So by measuring your social indicators, you can be able to say, oh, this change in poverty or inequality is mostly due to direct taxes or to indirect taxes. And if the government is planning to increase some taxes, then you can model that because you isolated the amount of taxes individual pay, you add this, the intended, you modify accordingly to the fiscal reform the government wants to implement, so you can model the new effect, and you can report no, and you can say no, wait, you can do that because the social cost will be huge, or yes, look, you can move forward with this because you will have a lot of resources for public finances, for investment, etc., etc. And the social cost is not that huge. Actually, the social cost is minimized, and also you can implement a specific mechanism to compensate the individuals who will be affected, or depending on, no, I will talk about this transfer, etc., the next week, because I already passed the time by half an hour, and I don't want to create more confusion. It sounds complex, but trust me, it is complex just in the sense that you have to have a good knowledge on how taxes and legal rules work in any specific country. The rest of the microsimulation, it's purely sums, additions and subtractions. They are simple identities. Subtracting a specific amount from some specific amount of income or expenditure and adding some other specific amount. So this is just basic arithmetics. This is not a huge deal. What the key, the critical part of the microsimulation is to understand how the system works. And we saw the previous session that, of course, the starting point or the zero stage is to guarantee that you will have access to the data set, that you will be supported by a local team who knows and understands how the system works, and you will have access to public information. And if it is not public, that you will be provided with information about the different rates, the criteria to pay taxes, to receive benefits, etc., etc. So that is the zero stage. Now that you achieve that stage and you are here, this is just simply to understand how the system works. Nothing more. The rest is just simple manipulation of numbers in a specific software, which can be Excel. And Alberto and I are creating an exercise with some observations from an actual survey, so you can follow. We will share the screen with you and we'll open the microphones so you can follow how the microsimulation in a specific real exercise is working. Okay, starting from the initial income concept, how we can decompose the different elements so we can model, at the end we can model some specific changes to one of those elements. So I think you have the presentation. You can review with more detail these explanations, these identities. I don't want to spend more time here and to create more consumption. My intention is to explain the rationale, and that's it. Thank you very much. Please, if you have comments, if you have specific questions, please use the chat, or you can use. Let me mention again the proposal from the previous session. We will open a specific communication channel for the Unit 5, where you can send your inquiries, your specific comments and questions. Olga, who is the tutor of these sessions, will be in charge of gathering all the questions, and then we can address those comments and questions in this additional special session where we will be presenting an actual exercise. So if you have questions, please go ahead. If not, exactly, it will be available using the forum post. Using the forum, yes. If you have questions probably later this night, maybe you can think, oh, I have a question about taxes. Please send it. It is important. I know. I mean, this is a lot of information to understand in just one document and in just 1 hour presentation. I mean, probably it is useful if you, in your context, in your reality, in your country, think about this. Okay, I am a citizen of this country. I know, I have a fair knowledge of what are the problems, how the taxes work, etc., etc. I don't like to pay so much taxes for this, or some people shouldn't pay taxes for that, etc., etc. I would like, in my country, to have a fiscal reform that is, I'm at this and that and that. I think it will be useful if you think about that possibility, that scenario. So you can, I mean, by doing so, you will certainly have some specific questions. What would you like to do? What you think will be efficient and fair in your country in terms of a specific fiscal reform, both the taxation side and the social expenditure side, in terms of transfers, etc., etc. Think about it. I mean, that is a question that we wrote initially at the beginning of the course in the forum. Please share with us your interest. What would you like to do in your country? What do you think will be fair? What would you think will be necessary to be implemented here? If you think about that, you will probably come with a lot of questions. So that will be very useful for us, because we can review those questions and we can formulate some specific answers, or we can explain the exercise according to those interests and questions, right? So thank you very much. I hope not to be that confusing. But yeah, I mean, the microsimulation it's complex, because there are a lot of concepts, a lot of terms. But please, if you have questions now or later, please let us know. Please think about this potential exercise in your country, and trust me, you will have a lot of questions. So please send them, and that's it. Thank you very much. Apparently there are no questions. I don't know, Ivan Rueda, if we should close the session, and I assume you will send your questions later. Please do. And yes, we'll meet next week to discuss about the social expenditure side.
Okay, thank you very much, Eduardo. I know maybe this is a little complex, but it's an excellent material. Yes, I don't see any question. Then, okay, have a nice day for everybody, and thank you again. Okay.
Goodbye. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye, Kim. Bye, Atkinson, Glenn, Geraldine. Also, Olga, who has our tutoring activities. Okay, thank you. Bye.